The morning had started like any other. Sunlight slipped gently through the blinds of a modest house tucked in a quiet neighborhood. The streets were calm, children were walking to school, and neighbors exchanged casual greetings as they passed each other. Inside one of these homes lived a man who on the surface seemed like an ordinary person. He had a small garden out front, a few cars in the driveway, and a life built carefully around stability and routine. He moved through the house with quiet confidence, making coffee and checking his messages. His days were simple: work, home, occasional visits to the local store, and evenings spent reading or tending to his little garden. To anyone passing by, he was just another man living a normal life, blending effortlessly into the fabric of the community. People trusted him. They waved, smiled, and often leaned on him for advice or small favors. No one had the slightest idea about the life he had left behind, a life that few could ever imagine. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, gazing at the street. A soft breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. He had worked hard to escape chaos, to leave behind the life of danger and violence that had once been all he knew. The quiet moments in his home were a luxury, a reward for years of discipline and survival. But that morning, peace was fragile. He noticed a group of people lingering at the end of the street. At first, it didn't seem threatening. The neighborhood had its share of troublemakers, and sometimes teenagers would loiter just to make noise. But something was off. Their movements were deliberate, almost predatory. Their eyes swept the street with a strange intensity. His instincts, honed over years of training, flared. A tension settled in his chest. He took a careful sip of coffee, keeping his eyes on them, analyzing their posture, estimating their numbers. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate. Within minutes, the group had approached his home. Doors banged, windows rattled, and loud shouts filled the air. Chaos exploded where calm had existed moments before. Furniture was overturned, objects thrown, and walls scratched. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the quiet street. The neighbors came running, shouting, confused and frightened. Some reached for their phones to call the police, while others simply froze, unsure what to do. Inside, the man moved differently than anyone could have expected. There was no panic in his eyes, no wild movements. He moved with precision, scanning each room quickly, checking doors, noting exits. His mind was already running through every possible scenario. To the gang outside, it must have looked like he was caught off guard. To him, it was simply a test he had seen before, in different forms in different places. He had survived situations like this countless times, though none of them were meant to happen in a quiet suburban street. The gang made noise, breaking things, laughing as if they were untouchable. They had no idea who lived inside. They didn't know the quiet man they were attacking was trained to survive, trained to fight, trained to make impossible decisions in seconds. He had left that world behind for a reason, but the skills never left him. They had become part of who he was, and now they were about to make that known, though not recklessly, not violently, not without control. Neighbors watched from a distance, terrified. Some had called the police, but they were slow to arrive. Sirens would come, but by the time they did, the situation would already have changed. He knew the value of patience. He waited, observing the gang's mistakes, their overconfidence, their ignorance of the threat inside. Each movement they made revealed more about their planning, or their lack of it. Inside the house, he began to quietly secure his surroundings. Locks clicked into place, cameras he had installed years ago automatically recorded every angle. Nothing was left to chance. He checked the doors and windows quickly, noting which could be reinforced and which were already compromised. His experience as a trained operative taught him to think ahead, to anticipate moves that others wouldn't even consider. The gang, unaware of what they were facing, continued their destruction. They threw objects against walls and floors, trying to provoke a reaction. They shouted threats, hoping to intimidate him, but he remained calm, focused. His mind replayed drills and exercises from years ago, ones that had kept him alive in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. He calculated their numbers, their reach, and their weaknesses. Time seemed to stretch. Every second counted, and every second he waited allowed him to learn more about them. Finally, he made a decision. He wouldn't rush. There was no need for rash action. The gang had already shown their hand. Now it was his turn to take control, but quietly, methodically, and without giving anyone the chance to call him a hero or a criminal. He was simply a man protecting his home, his life, and his peace. Outside, one of the gang members attempted to break through a reinforced door. He paused, unaware of the man's presence behind it. In that pause, the quiet man had already assessed him, understanding the likely reaction, the physical position, the possible escape routes. It was all instinct and training at the same time. He didn't move yet. He let the man overextend, allowed him to believe he had the upper hand. The chaos continued for a few more minutes. Then he made subtle moves to redirect them, forcing the gang into positions where they could be observed and contained. Each action was precise, invisible to the neighbors, invisible to the gang. They thought they were causing fear, but in reality they were walking into a calculated strategy. When the police finally arrived, the scene was confusing to them. They saw overturned furniture, broken glass, and a terrified neighborhood. But they could not see the invisible order behind it. They could not see the quiet control, the calm eye at the center of the storm. They assumed the man inside was just another victim, shaken and scared. Inside, the man reviewed what had happened. His home was damaged, but no one was seriously hurt. The gang had fled before they realized the danger they had courted. The neighbors were shaken, but safe. And for a brief moment, the man allowed himself a deep breath. He had kept control without escalating violence unnecessarily, without letting anger dictate his actions. Later that day, he began assessing the damage. Broken windows would be replaced, doors repaired, and the house restored to the peaceful state it had held just hours before. He knew that in time the neighborhood would calm and life would return to normal. But he also knew that the world had a way of testing even those who sought peace. And in that test, he had passed. Not with brute force, but with intelligence, patience, and calm resolve. As evening fell, the neighborhood was quiet once again. Children played in the streets, neighbors chatted, and the police completed their reports. To them, the man remained an ordinary figure, polite and calm, a survivor of a frightening situation. To him, it was a reminder that life could change in an instant, and that peace was always something to be protected, even if it meant revealing skills the world had never seen. He stood on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. His home was damaged, yes, but the spirit inside it was intact. And though no one knew the truth of who he really was, he understood something vital. Strength did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it existed quietly, behind calm eyes, in measured actions and in the unwavering resolve to survive and protect what mattered most. The days after the attack were quieter, but the tension lingered. The neighborhood slowly returned to its normal rhythm, with children laughing and neighbors greeting each other, but he could not shake the feeling that something had changed. His home was being repaired, windows replaced, walls patched, and the sounds of construction were constant. Even as he moved through his daily routines, there was a part of him that remained alert, watching, thinking. The gang had struck without warning, and though they had fled, he knew that those who acted violently rarely stopped easily. He spent hours reviewing what had happened, not with anger or fear, but with precision. Each broken object, each footprint, each careless movement of the gang had left clues. He traced them quietly, memorizing details that others might miss. This was instinctual for him. It was a skill built over years, forged in situations far more dangerous than a suburban street. But it was not pride that drove him. It was responsibility. He had chosen to live a quiet life, but he could not ignore threats, especially when they had reached his door. As he moved through his home, he noticed small reminders of the life he had left behind. A photo of him in uniform, carefully hidden behind books on a shelf. A plaque commemorating years of service in missions that most people would never understand. These were not trophies, not symbols of vanity. They were reminders of discipline, of survival, of a life where every decision carried weight. He had put that life behind him, yet it had shaped every fiber of his being. In quiet moments, memories returned like flashes. Nights in harsh environments, days spent in grueling physical training, missions where every choice could mean life or death. He remembered the camaraderie of those who had shared those experiences, the silent understanding that existed without words. He remembered the thrill of knowing he was part of something larger than himself, and the relief of finally stepping away, of leaving the chaos behind. But those memories were not just memories, they were lessons. He had learned to remain calm under pressure, to anticipate danger, to act decisively without hesitation. And now in his own home, those lessons were once again coming to the surface. He decided it was time to learn more about the gang. He had seen enough to know they were reckless and their attack had been poorly planned, yet dangerous enough to warrant caution. He began quietly observing, noting patterns. He walked through the neighborhood during the day, blending in like any other resident, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. He checked the streets for suspicious cars, unfamiliar faces, and movements that seemed out of place. His approach was methodical, almost invisible. Neighbors sometimes noticed him outside, walking slowly, appearing thoughtful. They might have assumed he was enjoying the morning or tending to errands, but he was studying, cataloging, memorizing. Each detail was important, each observation a piece of a larger puzzle. He was not acting out of vengeance or anger. He was acting out of awareness, understanding that knowledge was the first step in protecting himself and those around him. At night, he reviewed the information he had gathered. Notes on the gang's routines, vehicles, and behavior were carefully organized. Maps of the neighborhood were spread across his table, marking points of entry, escape routes, and likely meeting places. It was a system of preparation, not paranoia. He had learned that preparation was the difference between chaos and control, between survival and disaster. He also reached out to a few neighbors quietly, those he trusted. He did not tell them about his past, nor did he reveal his training. Instead, he suggested small measures for safety: better locks, lights that turned on automatically, careful observation of unfamiliar people. The neighbors listened, grateful for the advice, unaware of the depth of his knowledge. To them, he was just a helpful, cautious neighbor, someone who cared enough to notice. As the days passed, he began to notice subtle signs that the gang was still active. A shadowy figure near the corner store, cars lingering too long, whispers carried on the wind. Each sign confirmed what he had suspected. They had not forgotten him, and they were likely planning their next move. But he was ready. Unlike before, when the attack had caught him in a moment of calm, now he had time to prepare, to anticipate, to act strategically. He spent long hours reflecting on his options. The law could help, but the system was slow. Police patrols could deter but not prevent a determined gang. What he had was experience, skill, and calm judgment. He did not crave violence, but he did understand power, and he understood the consequences of underestimating someone who had survived the impossible. Late one night, he went through old training manuals and notes he had kept hidden. They were not for show. They were reminders of tactics, survival techniques, and mental discipline. He revisited them quietly, not out of necessity, but out of respect for the skills he had developed. Each page, each diagram brought clarity, a mental sharpening that would serve him in the days ahead. He also began practicing small exercises at home. Not aggressive ones, but drills to maintain readiness. Movement through confined spaces, awareness exercises, silent observation, and tactical thinking. It was not about preparing for a fight. It was about maintaining the edge of discipline, ensuring that his mind and body remained alert, responsive, and ready. Meanwhile, he paid attention to his neighbors' reactions. The community had rallied after the attack, helping each other repair damage, check in on children, and maintain normalcy. He supported these efforts quietly, participating in ways that seemed ordinary yet added subtle protection. His presence reassured them, though they did not know why. They could sense calm and confidence, and it influenced their own sense of safety. Through this period, he also reflected on his own reasons for leaving the life of danger behind. He remembered the moments of extreme stress, the losses, and the weight of responsibility. He remembered leaving friends behind, missions that had ended in heartbreak or quiet triumph. He remembered the longing for normal life, a home where peace could exist and a community where he could belong without fear. That longing had brought him here, and he would defend it, not with unnecessary violence but with careful, controlled action. It became clear to him that the gang's attack was more than random. They were testing, probing, looking for weakness. They assumed that any man in a suburban home would panic, fight blindly, or flee. They did not consider that someone might wait, observe, and respond in a way they could not anticipate. And he did not just want to survive, they needed to understand, without unnecessary harm, that he was not a man to be underestimated. One evening, he watched from his window as a car slowly drove past, its occupants lingering and scanning the street. He noted the license plate, the number of people, their movements. He did not confront them yet. Patience was part of the plan. He had learned long ago that timing was everything. A single wrong move could escalate a situation unnecessarily. The gang had shown recklessness. He would show precision. In private moments, he allowed himself a quiet reflection. He remembered the camaraderie of his former life, the discipline that had shaped him, and the strength that had grown from hardship. He understood that power without control was dangerous, and control without awareness was useless. He had both, and he intended to use them wisely. Neighbors might have noticed him sometimes walking in thought, checking small details or making quiet adjustments in his home. They could not see the mental mapping, the careful observation, or the strategic thinking behind every movement. They only saw a man quietly concerned, taking simple measures to protect his home. Yet in those quiet actions, he was preparing for any eventuality, ensuring that if the gang returned, they would meet someone who had already anticipated their every move. He also spent time reinforcing his home subtly. Nothing flashy or obvious, just improvements to security that would be noticeable only to someone paying attention. Doors were tightened, windows checked, and small alarms tested. These were not for show, they were preparation. Preparation, he knew, could mean the difference between chaos and control. As weeks passed, he noticed a subtle change. The gang had grown bolder elsewhere, showing recklessness in other neighborhoods, yet they avoided his street. Perhaps they sensed caution. Perhaps luck had kept them distracted, but he knew it was more than luck. They were unaware that someone watched, analyzed, and anticipated their every move. The quiet man understood something important. Power was not always visible. It existed in the patience of preparation, in the discipline of observation, and in the calm before any storm. He had once lived a life where power was tested every day, and now he applied those lessons quietly, protecting his home and his community without drawing attention to himself. As he looked out the window one evening, the street bathed in the warm glow of sunset. He allowed himself a small smile. The neighborhood was calm, the repairs were underway, and life seemed to return to normal. Yet he knew that danger never truly slept and vigilance was always necessary. He did not need to reveal who he was. His past, his skills, and his discipline were his alone. But in every quiet action, every careful observation, he was preparing, ensuring that peace would remain, and that those who sought to disrupt it would learn, eventually, that they had underestimated him. The quiet man returned to his routines, blending seamlessly into the neighborhood. He went to work, tended his home, and helped neighbors with small tasks. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet behind that ordinary life, the sharp mind of a trained warrior was at work. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a protector, a watchful presence ensuring that calm and safety could exist, even in the face of chaos. And in that quiet vigilance, he found a strange satisfaction. He had left the life of danger behind. Yet he had not left behind the skills, the discipline, or the awareness that could save him and those around him. The gang might think he was just a man like any other, but he knew the truth. He had faced far greater threats, and he had survived. They had no idea what they were up against, and that ignorance would be their undoing if they ever returned. The calm in the neighborhood was deceiving. From the outside, life seemed to have returned to normal. Children played, neighbors chatted, and the local store buzzed with routine business. But inside his home, the quiet man was far from relaxed. He had been watching, waiting, and learning from the gang's previous attack. Every small detail mattered. The direction they came from, the cars they used, the timing of their movements. Each observation added a piece to the puzzle he was carefully constructing. He moved through his home with purpose. Rooms were checked, cameras reviewed, and notes updated. He was not preparing for recklessness or revenge. He was preparing for certainty. He needed to ensure that if the gang returned, he would be ready in every sense. He thought of their strengths and weaknesses, their likely plans, and the mistakes they had already made. And he knew that control was his greatest advantage. Outside, he began a subtle campaign of observation. Walking the streets during different times of day, he noted every unfamiliar face, every suspicious vehicle, every sound that seemed out of place. He spoke briefly to neighbors, asking simple questions that seemed casual, but actually helped him gather information. No one suspected that behind his polite words he was quietly mapping every detail of the threat. Even small actions mattered. He noted the way a car parked near the corner could provide cover for someone watching, or how a certain streetlight created shadows that could hide movements. He memorized the gang's faces from photographs and sightings, their mannerisms and their likely routes. Each observation made him more prepared, more aware, and more in control. At night, when the neighborhood slept, he reviewed his notes again. Maps of the streets, locations of likely gang hideouts, and their previous patterns were all laid out on his table. He considered every scenario carefully, running through possibilities in his mind. There was no rush. He understood that patience was more powerful than aggression. The gang had rushed in recklessly once. They would learn nothing from doing it again. His mind wandered back to his past training. Years of military discipline had taught him the value of anticipation, strategy, and calm execution. Every step of his preparation was informed by that experience, though he did not rely on force unnecessarily. He knew that subtlety, observation, and precision could achieve what recklessness could not, and he intended to use every tool at his disposal to protect his home and those around him. He also began preparing his home in subtle ways. Doors and windows were reinforced quietly, lights adjusted to illuminate areas strategically, and cameras positioned to cover every angle. Nothing was obvious, nothing exaggerated. To neighbors, it looked like normal maintenance and security checks. But for him, each change increased control, ensuring that any intrusion could be monitored and managed effectively. The gang, meanwhile, was growing bolder elsewhere. He observed reports of small crimes, disturbances, and reckless behavior in nearby neighborhoods. They had learned nothing from their first encounter, and their arrogance had only grown. He realized that this overconfidence was their greatest weakness. They had no idea he was watching, analyzing, and planning. Their ignorance gave him an advantage he would not waste. During the day, he took careful walks, blending into the rhythm of the neighborhood while watching. Each interaction with people seemed ordinary, yet each was an opportunity to observe subtle signs. A glance, a movement, a pattern that could indicate their presence. He listened more than he spoke, and he noticed details that most would overlook. Every observation was recorded in his mind, a living map of potential threats and opportunities. He also started preparing mentally. Calmness was his greatest asset, and he maintained it with quiet exercises, visualizing scenarios, practicing mental drills, and running through potential responses. It was not about imagining a fight. It was about ensuring clarity of mind so that no matter what happened, he could act without hesitation or error. Years of discipline had taught him that panic was the enemy of survival, and he had no intention of letting panic dictate his actions. Evenings were spent reviewing footage from the cameras he had set up. He watched every angle of the neighborhood, noting cars, faces, and unusual movements. Small details like a discarded object on a corner or a person lingering too long near a streetlight became crucial clues. He recorded everything carefully, creating a timeline of observations that gave him insight into patterns he could exploit. Neighbors occasionally asked for his help or advice. He provided it with quiet assurance, helping install lights, giving tips on home safety, or suggesting small adjustments to routines. No one knew that behind his calm demeanor was a mind that could anticipate danger hours before it arrived. His guidance seemed ordinary, but it subtly increased the safety of the entire street. One afternoon, he noticed something unusual. A car parked in a position that did not make sense, its engine running but no one visibly inside. He watched from a distance, noting the license plate, the time, and the behavior. It was subtle, but it was a signal that the gang, or someone associated with them, was nearby. He did not confront them. Instead, he continued to observe, cataloging details that would later reveal their intentions. Patience, he reminded himself, was more powerful than action. He also began practicing silent movements inside his home, not aggressive maneuvers, but ways to move quickly and efficiently through rooms, to position himself advantageously, and to ensure he could respond without wasting time. These exercises were almost invisible, unnoticed by anyone else, but each one sharpened his readiness. He was not preparing for a fight for entertainment. He was preparing for control, for protection, and for the ability to act with precision if needed. At night, he reflected on the lessons from his past missions. Discipline, awareness, patience, and observation had kept him alive in some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. Now they were keeping him safe at home in his community, surrounded by ordinary people who had no idea of the danger that had passed through their street. He understood that power was often invisible. It did not need to announce itself. The knowledge of how to act and when to act was more than enough. The gang, still unaware of his capabilities, made small mistakes. Cars left too long in the same place, members seen together too often, small signs of overconfidence. He noted everything, creating a mental record that would allow him to respond if they tried another attack. Their ignorance became his advantage, their recklessness his tool. He did not celebrate this. He simply acknowledged it as part of the plan. He also made small adjustments to protect the community. Lights positioned to eliminate shadows, cameras angled to cover blind spots, and small warnings placed to alert neighbors to unusual activity. These were subtle actions, almost invisible, but they created layers of safety. The neighborhood had no idea of the quiet vigilance that surrounded them, and that was exactly how it should be. One evening, he observed the gang from a distance. They were meeting, planning, unaware that their movements were being tracked. He noted their positions, estimated their intentions, and quietly created a mental map of their strategy. Patience was crucial. He could strike at any moment, but he chose to wait. To control the situation rather than let it control him. Each decision was deliberate, measured, and precise. Inside his home, he ran simulations quietly. Paths, exits, and responses were practiced in his mind. He anticipated every move the gang might make, considering every possible scenario. It was not about fear or anger, it was about control. Years of discipline had taught him that control was the difference between chaos and safety, between reaction and strategy. Neighbors sometimes saw him working late, checking cameras, walking quietly through the street, or helping repair small damage from the previous attack. They saw a man concerned for his home, thoughtful and disciplined. They did not know that behind those actions was a mind capable of anticipating danger hours before it arrived, a man who could act decisively if needed, and a protector who would not allow recklessness to endanger those around him. The quiet man understood one truth clearly: preparation and patience could achieve what aggression never could. He did not need to announce his presence. He did not need to strike first. He only needed awareness, observation, and the ability to act with precision when the moment was right. That understanding gave him a quiet confidence, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos the gang had tried to create. Weeks passed. The gang continued their reckless behavior elsewhere, but they avoided the street where he lived. Perhaps they sensed something. Perhaps luck had kept them distracted, but he knew it was more than chance. His careful observation, preparation, and patience had created a shield around his home and his community. No one had to know the full extent of what he could do. The calm alone was enough, and yet he remained vigilant. Danger had not disappeared, and he would not allow complacency. He continued his careful observations, subtle preparations, and quiet exercises. Each day was a test of patience, awareness, and discipline. And though no one around him realized it, the quiet man was ready for anything, fully prepared to respond in a way that was precise, controlled, and effective. In the quiet of his home, as night fell over the neighborhood, he allowed himself a small moment of reflection. The past, with all its danger and discipline, had shaped him into someone capable of facing threats without panic or recklessness. The present required vigilance, patience, and subtlety. And the future, though uncertain, would be met with the same quiet confidence that had guided him through every challenge in life. He understood that true strength was often invisible, existing in observation, preparation, and discipline, rather than loud displays or reckless action. He had survived extreme circumstances before, and now in the quiet streets of his neighborhood, He applied the same principles to protect his home and community. The gang might think they were in control, but they had no idea who they were dealing with, or how much he had already prepared. The tension in the air was thick, though nothing seemed out of place to the casual observer. The neighborhood appeared calm, the streets quiet, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the houses. Inside his home, the quiet man was alert, aware that the situation could escalate at any moment. Weeks of observation and preparation had brought him to this point. He had studied the gang, learned their patterns, anticipated their movements, and now he was ready to take action, but on his terms. He began by reviewing all the information he had gathered. Maps, camera footage, notes on the gang's routines, and subtle details from neighborhood observations were spread across the table. He traced their routes with his finger, visualizing every move, every misstep they might make. His mind ran through scenarios repeatedly, preparing for every possibility. Patience had been his ally until now, but the moment had arrived when careful action was required. The gang had grown careless over time. Reports from nearby neighborhoods indicated they were involved in reckless acts, and their confidence seemed to grow with every success. They had underestimated the quiet man, assuming that after the first attack, he would be paralyzed with fear or passivity. They had no idea that every misstep, every reckless act, had been meticulously observed and recorded. As night fell, he positioned himself strategically. The house was quiet, the lights dimmed to avoid attracting attention, and cameras monitored every approach. He ensured he had clear lines of sight from multiple vantage points. Each entry and exit point was accounted for, and he had created subtle barriers to guide movement, controlling where anyone could go without them realizing it. It was a quiet dominance, a way to manage the situation without needing to shout, chase, or escalate unnecessarily. He watched the street. The gang appeared, moving as if they were confident and untouchable. Their laughter and casual chatter betrayed their arrogance. They had no idea he had already mapped their behavior, their weaknesses, and the small mistakes they had made in previous attacks. Each one of them was predictable now, their actions following the patterns he had anticipated. The quiet man did not move recklessly. He observed, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. Every detail mattered. The angle of light, the placement of shadows, the timing of footsteps, even the sound of a vehicle engine. He remained invisible, unnoticed but entirely in control. To him, this was a game of precision, not force. The goal was not to hurt unnecessarily, but to neutralize the threat and restore safety. One of the gang members stepped too close to the front of the house, unaware of the camera recording every angle. The quiet man noted his movement, anticipating the next steps. The gang was confident, but that confidence was their weakness. It made them careless, predictable, and ultimately manageable. He smiled faintly, not out of anger, but out of satisfaction in seeing the plan unfold as intended. He began moving quietly through his home, positioning himself where he could monitor multiple points at once. His steps were soft, deliberate, and controlled. He was not rushing, he was orchestrating. Every move was designed to maximize awareness and control, to ensure that if the gang tried anything, they would meet someone who had already considered every possibility. The gang's chatter continued, growing louder as they searched the street. They were trying to provoke fear, assuming that it would elicit a reaction. But he remained calm, steady, and aware. His presence was invisible, yet dominant. Every instinct, every training exercise he had ever learned was being applied quietly, without the need for brute force. Suddenly, one of the gang members made a mistake. He moved in a way that exposed a flaw in their approach, stepping into an area that had been carefully prepared to observe without confrontation. The quiet man took note, assessing how this misstep could provide leverage. He did not move immediately, instead allowing the mistake to unfold, knowing that each error they made gave him more control over the situation. He watched as the gang continued, unaware of how carefully their movements were being analyzed. He could predict their next steps almost instinctively, based on weeks of careful observation. Each movement, each glance, each misjudged step revealed more about them. and he cataloged it all quietly. He had learned to act decisively in extreme conditions, and now that training allowed him to control the moment without needing to fight directly. He began to implement subtle measures. Lights flickered in patterns that forced the gang to pause, shadows shifted to obscure their path, and small obstacles guided them toward areas where their presence could be monitored safely. It was not aggressive. It was tactical. Each action increased control, and each error the gang made reinforced the advantage he held. The quiet man reflected briefly on why he had left his old life behind. He had sought peace, stability, and normalcy. But the lessons he had learned, the discipline, awareness, and calm precision, were still part of him. He did not seek conflict, but he understood responsibility. Protecting his home and his neighbors was not just instinct, it was a principle. And now, as the gang unknowingly exposed themselves to him, he knew it was time to ensure that principle was maintained. He continued monitoring, moving silently from room to room, ensuring he had complete awareness. Every door, window, and street corner was accounted for. Every likely path the gang might take had been anticipated. And still, he waited. He did not need to act hastily. His patience was as powerful as any force. Then the gang made a critical error. One of them separated from the others, stepping into a narrow path that had been observed and controlled. The quiet man saw the opportunity. With careful, deliberate movement, he positioned himself to intervene, not recklessly but with precise control. He was ready to neutralize the threat if necessary, but he would do so without unnecessary violence. Every action was deliberate, every response measured. The street seemed to hold its breath. The neighbors, unaware of the unfolding control, continued, their routines blissfully ignorant of the danger that had been neutralized without them even realizing it. To them, everything remained ordinary. To the gang, confusion was beginning to set in. They had underestimated the quiet man, and their arrogance was starting to unravel. He moved subtly, signaling indirectly to the gang without revealing his presence fully. Small noises, lights, and carefully placed visual cues guided them, forcing them into positions where their own mistakes would become their disadvantage. They reacted instinctively, unaware that each movement was anticipated. It was not about creating fear. It was about controlling outcomes, guiding them toward choices they had not considered. By the time the local authorities arrived, the situation had shifted entirely. The gang was disoriented, their confidence shattered. The quiet man had orchestrated the scenario so that law enforcement could intervene with minimal risk to anyone. The officers could see the gang confused and contained, but they had no idea how it had been achieved. They assumed luck, timing, or perhaps community vigilance had played a role. They could not see the precision, the patience, or the tactical mind behind the outcome. Inside the home, he allowed himself a deep breath. The immediate threat had been neutralized without chaos or unnecessary violence. His home was secure, the neighborhood safe, and the gang had been taught, silently and efficiently, that their assumptions were wrong. Patience, observation, and strategy had won the day. He had acted decisively yet calmly, protecting life and property without becoming reckless. Later, he walked through the house, checking doors, windows, and cameras. Everything was intact, and each small detail confirmed that his careful planning had worked. He did not need recognition or praise. He was satisfied with the quiet knowledge that his home and his community were safe. He understood that control, awareness, and discipline were stronger than aggression, and that calm precision could achieve what force alone never could. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes in the street. Lights were brighter, cameras more noticeable, and small adjustments suggested increased vigilance. They did not know who had orchestrated the calm or how much control had been exercised behind the scenes. They only sensed safety returning, a quiet reassurance that life could continue peacefully. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The gang, now aware that they had underestimated the man they had attacked, retreated elsewhere. They had learned, though not in the way they expected. They would remember the calm precision, the invisible control, and the consequences of recklessness. Yet they could not name the person responsible. They could only acknowledge the results. The quiet man returned to his routines. Work, family, neighbors, and simple pleasures became the focus once more, but his vigilance remained. The experience had reinforced lessons he already knew. Patience, observation, and careful preparation were more powerful than impulsive action. He had acted decisively, yet with restraint, and had protected not only himself, but everyone around him. As night fell over the neighborhood, he looked out at the street. The calm, the ordinary life, and the quiet presence of neighbors were all part of what he had protected. He smiled faintly, understanding that true strength did not need to announce itself. It existed quietly in awareness, control, and preparation. And for now, at least, peace had returned. The neighborhood had slowly returned to its rhythm. The streets, once tense and watchful, were now filled with the sounds of everyday life, children laughing as they rode bikes, neighbors chatting over fences, and the hum of cars passing by. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Yet inside his home, the quiet man remained aware, his eyes scanning, his mind always considering potential threats. Even though the immediate danger had passed, he knew that vigilance was never truly over. Repairs to his home were underway. Broken windows had been replaced, doors reinforced, and walls patched. The workmen moved quickly, chatting casually, unaware that their presence added to the quiet security the man maintained. Each repair, each adjustment, was a step toward restoring the sense of safety that had been disrupted. Yet he paid attention to every detail, ensuring that even the repairs contributed subtly to his control and awareness of the surroundings. He walked through each room, checking the minor adjustments he had made earlier: security cameras, reinforced entry points, subtle lighting. To anyone else, it seemed like ordinary home maintenance, but to him, it was a continuation of a process that had begun weeks earlier. Every precaution, every small detail contributed to a sense of preparedness that could never be taken for granted. Neighbors came by offering help and support. Some brought food, others offered to assist with repairs. The quiet man accepted graciously, sharing small conversations, offering gentle guidance, and quietly reinforcing small safety measures. None of them knew the full story, nor did they need to. To them, he was simply a kind, reliable neighbor, someone who had endured a frightening event and emerged calm. But his calm was more than patience. It was the result of strategy, awareness, and control, applied without spectacle. In quiet moments, he reflected on what had happened. The gang had underestimated him, as many had in the past. They had believed they could intimidate and disrupt, assuming that ordinary fear would dominate any ordinary person. They did not know that he had lived through experiences far more dangerous, that he had trained for situations where every decision could mean life or death. They had no idea that his patience, his observation, and his discipline were as much a part of him as his quiet demeanor. He thought about his past life, the missions, the training, the years of discipline that had taught him to remain calm under pressure. He had left that world behind deliberately, seeking peace and normalcy. Yet, even in leaving it, the lessons of his past remained. They were tools, quietly carried forward, ready to be applied when necessary. Not for pride, not for glory, but for protection. As he moved outside, he noticed the subtle changes in the neighborhood. The streets were brighter, cameras installed in strategic locations, small improvements to lighting and visibility. He had not announced these changes, but they had enhanced the safety of the entire block. Neighbors may not have known why they felt safer, but the sense of calm that had returned was in no small part due to his quiet vigilance. He walked slowly, observing. Patterns were still important. Even though the gang had retreated, he watched for signs of their return, noting every unfamiliar vehicle and every stranger lingering too long. His mind cataloged everything, silently creating a network of awareness that extended beyond his own home. Each observation was a small act of protection, ensuring that the tranquility of the neighborhood would not be broken again. The quiet man also reflected on human resilience. He had seen fear and chaos before, and he understood how ordinary people responded to extraordinary events. Panic, anger, and rash decisions were common reactions. Yet he had seen the difference that calm, measured action could make. He understood that true strength was often invisible, expressed in awareness, patience, and careful execution, rather than force or aggression. Neighbors began to notice the confidence that seemed to surround him. He was polite, helpful, and approachable, yet there was a quiet authority in his presence. People did not know the depth of his experience, but they could sense calm and competence. That quiet assurance was reassuring, a reminder that even after frightening events, life could continue and safety could be restored. He also considered the lessons for the future. Danger, he knew, was never entirely absent. Situations could arise unexpectedly, and the world could test peace without warning. His response had not relied on violence or spectacle, but on preparation, awareness, and careful execution. He understood that these were skills that could be applied quietly, subtly, and effectively, without drawing attention or creating fear. Inside his home, he returned to his routines. Meals were prepared, work was tended to, and small household tasks completed. Yet even in these ordinary actions, his mind remained alert. Every movement, every sound, every subtle change in the environment was noted and assessed. The discipline that had guided him through extreme situations now guided him through ordinary life, ensuring that tranquility could endure. He also took time to reflect on the human side of his experiences. He considered the neighbors who had helped him, the community that had responded with care, and the importance of maintaining trust and support among ordinary people. Strength, he realized, was not just in skill or training. It was in the ability to protect, to act responsibly, and to maintain composure in the face of chaos. The gang had been disrupted, their arrogance shattered. Yet he did not dwell on revenge or triumph. His satisfaction came from knowing that the neighborhood was safe, that those who lived there could continue their lives without fear. It was the quiet victory of careful planning, observation, and execution, a success that required no celebration, no recognition, and no outward display. Evenings became a time for reflection. He would stand on his porch watching the sunset, observing the calm that had returned to the streets. The light shifted, shadows moved, and life continued. He felt a quiet pride not in power or heroism, but in responsibility fulfilled. He had protected his home, his community, and the fragile sense of normalcy that people often took for granted. He understood that life had a way of testing even those who sought peace. Threats could appear unexpectedly, and the ordinary could be disrupted in an instant. Yet he had learned that preparation, awareness, and disciplined action could restore order, often quietly, without spectacle or chaos. That understanding had become part of him, shaping every decision, every observation, and every movement. Neighbors may never know the full story, and that was exactly as it should be. His actions had not been for recognition, but for protection. The calm that returned to the streets, the sense of safety that was restored, and the trust that people felt were the results of careful planning and quiet vigilance. It was a hidden strength, one that needed no acknowledgement to be effective. He also thought about the idea of resilience. Life would continue and challenges would arise, but people could endure when there was guidance, protection, and quiet vigilance. Ordinary people could be shielded from chaos, not always by force, but by awareness and thoughtful action. That, he realized, was as much a contribution to the world as any overt act of heroism. In the days that followed, the neighborhood continued to heal. Repairs were completed, routines resumed, and life regained its natural flow. Children played in the streets, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the sense of community strengthened. Yet behind that ordinary calm, the quiet man remained alert, his mind cataloging patterns, observing details, and preparing for the future. Peace, he understood, was never permanent without effort. He reflected quietly on his own journey. From a life of extreme danger to a quiet civilian existence, he had learned that true power was not always visible. It existed in preparation, patience, awareness, and disciplined action. It existed in subtle choices, careful observation, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. And it existed quietly, often unnoticed, yet profoundly effective. The quiet man returned to his routines, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the neighborhood. Work, home, community, and personal care filled his days. Yet the lessons from his past, the discipline and the awareness remained as part of him. They were invisible to the outside world, but they were essential to the safety, calm, and resilience of the life he had built. As night fell and the streets grew still, he allowed himself a final reflection. Danger had come and gone, but peace had been preserved. Lives had been protected, and chaos had been managed without unnecessary violence. The quiet man understood that heroism was not always loud, dramatic, or celebrated. Often it was quiet, careful, and invisible. It existed in awareness, control, and responsibility, and it endured because it was guided by principle rather than pride. He smiled faintly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood was calm, the streets safe, and life could continue without fear. He had done what needed to be done. Not for recognition, not for glory, but for the simple human reason of protecting those who could not protect themselves. That was enough. That had always been enough. And so the quiet man returned to his life, blending seamlessly into the ordinary world while carrying the extraordinary skills, discipline, and awareness that had saved him and those around him. Peace, he knew, was not just a state of the world, it was a responsibility. And he was ready to bear that responsibility quietly, patiently, and effectively for as long as it was needed.